At 02138 hours on the 5th of June 1942, lookouts aboard the cruiser Kumano spotted USS Tambor surfaced 9,000 yards distant. Rear Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding Cruiser Division 7, immediately signaled an emergency turn, 45 degrees to starboard. Simultaneous. All ships execute together. Avoid possible torpedo attack. Standard procedure. The formation consisted of 4 Mogami-class heavy cruisers steaming in line ahead, Kumano leading, Suzuya second, Mikuma third, Mogami fourth. Behind them, destroyers Arashio and Asashio. The flagship Kumano turned 45 degrees as ordered. Suzuya, second in line. Executed properly, Mikuma. Third ship, turned 90 degrees, double the ordered angle. Whether this was misunderstood signal or navigator error would never be determined. What mattered was that Mikuma swung across Mogami's path, fourth in line, watching Suzuya ahead, not seeing Mikuma turning into her track. By the time Mogami's lookouts shouted warning, collision was inevitable. Mogami's bow struck Mikuma's portside just aft of the bridge at approximately 15 knots closing speed. The impact crushed Mogami's bow almost to her forward turret. 30 feet of stem collapsed. Forward compartments flooded. Speed dropped immediately to 12 knots. On Mikuma, the collision punctured fuel tanks. Oil poured into the sea. Heavy fuel oil, a slick that would trail behind her for hours, visible from the air for miles. A marker saying, "Here we are, come kill us." Kurita assessed the situation quickly. 2 cruisers crippled, 100 miles west of Midway. Dawn approaching. American aircraft certain to attack. He made his decision. Detach the destroyers. Screen the damaged cruisers. Kumano and Suzuya would escape at full speed. Mogami and Mikuma would limp westward at 12 knots in hope. This was what treaty circumvention had produced. 4 cruisers designed to be the most powerful light cruisers ever built. Converted to heavy cruisers when treaties no longer mattered. Now 2 were crippled by collision rather than enemy action. Within 24 hours, Mikuma would be sunk. Mogami would survive with catastrophic damage requiring 18 months of repairs. The triple threat cruisers, designed to cheat the Washington and London naval treaties, built too light, modified too heavy, destroyed at Midway, not by American bombs initially, but by their own emergency maneuver. The question is, how Japan built these ships at all given the restrictions imposed by international treaty? The answer reveals everything about how nations circumvent arms control agreements when national pride conflicts with negotiated limitations. The Washington Naval Treaty, signed February 6, 1922, established ratios for capital ships, 5 for Britain and America, 3 for Japan, 1.67 for France and Italy. Japan received 60% of what the United States and Britain were permitted. This was unacceptable to Japanese naval planners who believed parity was essential for defending the empire. But the alternative was an arms race Japan could not afford. The treaty was accepted. Then came the London Naval Treaty of 1930. The London Treaty of April 22, 1930 extended restrictions to cruisers. 2 categories: heavy cruisers, designated A-class, mounted guns exceeding 6.1 inches up to 8 inches maximum. Light cruisers, designated B-class, mounted guns 6.1 inches or smaller. Heavy cruiser tonnage was capped. Japan could build 12 heavy cruisers totaling 108,400 tons. The United States could build 18 totaling 180,000 tons. Britain received 15 cruisers totaling 146,800 tons. Again, Japan received roughly 60% of what America received. But the treaty included a critical loophole. Light cruiser tonnage was also limited, but the restrictions were less severe, and individual ship displacement was capped at 10,000 tons regardless of classification. But gun caliber defined the classification, not displacement. A ship mounting 6.1-inch guns was a light cruiser by treaty definition, even if it displaced 10,000 tons. A ship mounting 8-inch guns was a heavy cruiser, even if it displaced only 8,000 tons. Japanese naval planners saw the opportunity immediately. Build light cruisers to the maximum 10,000-ton limit. Mount 15 6.1-inch guns. This would give firepower equivalent to or exceeding contemporary heavy cruisers, which typically mounted 9 or 10 8-inch guns. The 6.1-inch gun fired faster. 15 guns firing 6 rounds per minute produced 90 rounds per minute. 10 8-inch guns firing 3 rounds per minute produced 30 rounds per minute. Triple the volume of fire. Against lightly armored targets like destroyers or light cruisers, the 6.1-inch shell was adequate. Against heavily armored targets, it was marginal. But the Japanese had a solution for that problem. Design the barbettes and turret rings to accept 8-inch turrets. When treaty restrictions lapsed or when war began, swap the guns. Light cruiser becomes heavy cruiser. 15 6-inch guns become 10 8-inch guns. The transformation would take months in a shipyard, but it could be done. The ship would have been designed from inception as a heavy cruiser, pretending to be a light cruiser until circumstances permitted revealing its true nature. This was treaty circumvention at the institutional level. Not violating the letter of the agreement. Violating the spirit, absolutely. The ships would comply with restrictions during peacetime when compliance mattered diplomatically. They would shed those restrictions during wartime when capability mattered operationally. Other nations suspected this. Intelligence reports suggested the Japanese cruisers were overweight and underdeclared, but proving it required access to Japanese shipyards. Nobody had that access. The deception worked, until it did not. The Mogami class was designed under the 1931 Fleet Replenishment Program. 4 ships, Mogami, Mikuma, Suzuya, Kumano. They would represent the apex of treaty-compliant light cruiser design. They would also represent everything wrong with designing warships to meet arbitrary treaty restrictions rather than operational requirements. The design specifications were ambitious. 15 155mm guns in 5 triple turrets. This was unprecedented. Japan had never mounted triple turrets on cruisers. The mechanism was complex. The loading system was automated but temperamental. The turrets were designed for 55-degree elevation. Dual-purpose capability. Surface and anti-aircraft fire. This required additional structure, additional weight. The guns themselves weighed approximately 69 tons each, including mounting. Multiply by 15. Add the turrets. Add the barbettes. Add the ammunition hoists. Add the magazines. The main armament alone consumed thousands of tons. Secondary armament consisted of 8 127mm dual-purpose guns in 4 twin turrets. These were positioned amidships. 4 40mm anti-aircraft guns. 12 24-inch torpedo tubes in 4 trainable triple mounts. Type 93 long lance torpedoes. Oxygen-powered. 610mm diameter. These were the most capable torpedoes afloat. Range 40,000 meters at 48 knots, or 20,000 meters at 52 knots. Warhead 490 kilograms. 12 torpedoes ready. 12 reloads stowed. This armament package, torpedoes and guns, was heavier than any light cruiser afloat and heavier than most heavy cruisers. Protection was designed to resist 155mm shells against magazines and machinery spaces. Main belt 100mm on the upper edge tapering to 65mm lower. 20-degree inclination. Connecting to a 40mm torpedo bulkhead. Deck armor 60mm over machinery sloping down. 40mm over magazines. Turret faces 100mm. This was adequate against 6-inch gunfire. It was marginal against 8-inch. It was wholly inadequate against larger calibers. Propulsion required power. 4 compound-geared impulse turbines driving 4 shafts. Then compound water tube boilers. Total installed horsepower, 152,000. This was immense. Contemporary American heavy cruisers developed 107,000 horsepower. The Japanese cruisers required 50% more power to achieve their design speed of 37 knots. This was faster than any cruiser afloat when they were designed. It was also unachievable in service due to displacement growth. But the attempt required massive machinery, massive boilers, massive weight. The problem was that all of this, the guns and torpedoes and armor and machinery and fuel and crew and everything else, had to fit into 10,000 tons standard displacement. The Washington Treaty defined standard displacement as fully equipped warship with full ammunition and stores but without fuel and reserve feed water. This was measured on completion. If the ship exceeded 10,000 tons, Japan would be in violation. The penalties were diplomatic embarrassment and potential withdrawal from the treaty system. The Japanese could not afford either. The designers did everything possible to save weight. Electric welding instead of riveting. This saved approximately 15% weight compared to conventional riveted construction. Revolutionary for 1931. Also untested at this scale, welding defects would prove catastrophic. Aluminum in the superstructure instead of steel. Lighter, also weaker and less fire resistant. Single funnel trunking 10 boilers into one stack. Compact bridge structure. Everything minimized. Everything optimized. Everything pushed to the absolute limit of what was structurally adequate. When Mogami was launched on the 14th of March, 1934, official displacement was listed as 8,500 tons. This was a lie. Actual standard displacement was approximately 11,200 tons, over 10% above treaty limits. The other three ships were similar. Mikuma 11,200 tons, Suzuya 11,100 tons, Kumano 11,200 tons. All exceeded treaty restrictions. All were declared compliant. The violation was systematic and deliberate. Japan calculated that other signatories could not prove non-compliance without access to Japanese records. The gamble succeeded until 1945, when American occupation forces opened those records. But violations of treaty displacement limits were the least of the problems. Sea trials revealed fundamental flaws. On the 28th of July, 1935, Mogami commissioned. Trials began immediately. At speed, the hull vibrated. The welded seams cracked. The fire control director shook so violently it could not track targets. The main battery turrets could not fire accurately. The ship was structurally inadequate for the stresses imposed by high-speed operations and main battery salvos. The welding had saved weight, but it also created structural weaknesses that riveted construction would not have exhibited. Worse, the ship was top-heavy. The 5 turrets, the heavy mass structure, the aluminum superstructure, all created excessive top weight. Stability was marginal in calm seas. In heavy weather, it was dangerous. On the 26th of September 1935, Mogami was caught in a typhoon, the Fourth Fleet incident. Multiple ships were damaged. Mogami suffered cracked hull plating, flooding. The bow was deformed. The forward turret was inoperable. She limped back to port requiring extensive repairs. Mikuma, commissioned 6 months later on the 29th of August, 1935, experienced similar problems. The third and fourth ships, Suzuya and Kumano, were still under construction. Modifications were made. Boilers reduced from 10 to 8 to save top weight. Hull strengthened. But the fundamental problem remained. The ships had been designed too light to carry the armament and achieve the speed specified. Between 1936 and 1938, all 4 ships underwent major reconstruction. Bulges were added to increase beam from 19.2 meters to 20.5 meters. This improved stability. It also increased displacement to approximately 13,000 tons. Speed dropped from the designed 37 knots to approximately 34.5 knots. Internal bracing was installed. The hull was reinforced. Welding defects were repaired. The cost was enormous. Millions of yen, thousands of man-hours. The ships that emerged were significantly heavier, significantly slower, and significantly more expensive than originally planned. They were also still classified as light cruisers, mounting 155mm guns, because Japan was still nominally complying with treaty restrictions. On the 2nd of December, 1936, Japan withdrew from the Second London Naval Treaty. The restrictions no longer applied. Planning began immediately to convert the Mogami class from light to heavy cruisers. Replace the 5 triple 155mm turrets with 5 twin 203mm turrets. The turrets salvaged from the cancelled battleships Kaga and Tosa were available. The modification had been planned from inception. The barbettes were the correct diameter. The ammunition hoists could be adapted. The magazines were large enough. The conversion would work. It would also take 18 months per ship and require major shipyard availability. Mogami entered Kur Naval Arsenal on the 28th of October 1939 for conversion. Work completed the 13th of April 1941. Mikuma converted between March 1939 and March 1940. Suzuya converted between December 1938 and October 1939. Kumano converted between September 1939 and October 1940. When they emerged, they mounted 10 203mm 50 caliber Type 3 guns and 5 twin turrets. Rate of fire 3 rounds per minute. 30 rounds per minute total. Range 29,600 meters. Shell weight 125.9 kilograms. Against armor. The 8-inch shell was far more effective than the 6-inch. Against lightly armored targets, the volume of fire was reduced by 2/3. The ships had traded sustained firepower for penetrating power. For commerce raiding or destroying destroyers, this was a poor trade. For engaging enemy cruisers in gunnery duels, this was essential. They also retained their Type 93 torpedoes, 12 tubes, 12 reloads. By 1941, anti-aircraft armament had been upgraded. 8 127mm guns remained, but the 40mm guns were replaced by multiple 25mm mountings. By 1943, some ships carried over 30 25mm guns. This was still inadequate against American carrier aircraft, but it represented the best Japan could provide. When war began on the 8th of December 1941, the Mogami class was assigned to Cruiser Division 7. They participated in the invasion of Malaya, the landings at Singora, Patani, and Kota Baru. In December, they covered landings at Kuching, Sarawak. In February 1942, they supported landings in Java, Borneo, and Sumatra. On the 28th of February, Mogami and Mikuma, with light cruiser Notori and multiple destroyers, engaged USS Houston and HMAS Perth in the Battle of Sunda Strait. Both Allied cruisers were sunk. Houston was hit by torpedoes and 8-inch shells. Perth was torpedoed. Approximately 690 American sailors died. 353 Australian sailors died. Japanese losses were minimal. One minesweeper damaged by friendly torpedoes. One transport hit by a torpedo intended for Perth. The battle demonstrated what the Mogami class could accomplish when engaging inferior opposition. Against modern heavy cruisers, the outcome might have been different. Against destroyers and smaller vessels, they were devastating. In April 1942, Cruiser Division 7 participated in the Indian Ocean raids, strikes against Ceylon, bombardment of shore installations, anti-shipping operations, minimal combat, maximum propaganda value. The ships performed adequately. No major damage, no losses. Then came Midway. The Battle of Midway, 4th through 7th of June 1942, was intended to lure the American Pacific Fleet into decisive engagement, capture Midway Island, force the Americans to respond, destroy their carriers, end their capacity to project power across the Pacific. The plan failed catastrophically. All 4 Japanese fleet carriers were sunk. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. American codebreakers had read Japanese communications. The ambush became a counter-ambush. By the evening of the 4th of June, the battle was effectively decided, but Cruiser Division 7 was still ordered to bombard Midway. At 10:50 hours on the 4th of June, Admiral Yamamoto ordered the bombardment. Cruiser Division 7, 140 miles away, turned toward Midway and increased speed to 35 knots. The sea was choppy. The destroyers lagged behind, unable to maintain that speed in rough conditions. At 21:20 hours, the order was canceled. The situation had changed. 4 carriers lost. The bombardment was pointless. At 21:38 hours, Kumano's lookout spotted USS Tambor surfaced. The collision followed. The aftermath was predictable. At 06:30 hours on the 5th of June, Mogami and Mikuma were spotted by a PBY Catalina from Midway. The oil slick was visible for miles. At 08:05 hours, 6 SBD Dauntless and 6 SB-2U Vindicator dive bombers from Marine Scout Bombing Squadron 241 attacked, near misses only. Heavy anti-aircraft fire disrupted the attacks. Captain Richard Fleming's Vindicator was hit and crashed into the sea near Mikuma. Post-battle analysis determined Fleming had not deliberately crashed into the cruiser, as later reports claimed. His aircraft was simply shot down. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously for pressing his attack despite damage. At 08:34 hours, 8 B-17 Flying Fortresses bombed from high altitude. No hits after these attacks. Rear Admiral Kurita, aboard Kumano, ordered Mogami and Mikuma to increase speed to 14 knots. The destroyers remained with them. On the 6th of June, the attacks intensified. At 09:50 hours, 26 SBD Dauntless from USS Hornet attacked. Mogami received 2 hits. Mikuma received several near misses. After 12:45 hours, 31 SBD Dauntless from USS Enterprise attacked. Mikuma received 5 direct hits and 2 near misses. The first bomb struck number 3 turret roof. Captain Sakayama was severely wounded. Executive Officer Commander Takashima took command. 2 hits devastated the starboard forward engine room. The port-aft engine room was destroyed by another hit. Around 1500 hours, 23 dive bombers from Hornet attacked again. Mikuma received at least 1 more hit. Commander Takashima was killed. The ship was dead in the water. Fires raged uncontrolled. The Type 93 torpedo reloads, stored on deck, exploded. The 24 torpedoes, each containing 490 kilograms of explosives, detonated sympathetically. The explosions tore open the hull. At approximately 19:30 hours, Mikuma capsized to port and sank. Position 29 degrees 28 minutes north, 173 degrees 11 minutes east. 700 men died. 240 were rescued by destroyers Arashio and Asashio. Mogami survived. Barely. She had been hit 6 times total across both days of attacks. The superstructure was destroyed. Number 5 turret, aft, was a wreck. Fires burned throughout the ship. Forward speed was limited to 12 knots initially, later increased to 14. She reached Truk on the 10th of June. Emergency repairs. Then transit to Japan. She arrived at Sasebo Naval Arsenal on the 14th of June. Full repairs lasted until the 13th of April, 1943. 10 months. The cost was equivalent to building a new destroyer. During the refit, a decision was made. Convert Mogami to an aviation cruiser. Remove number 4 and number 5 turrets. Extend the aft deck. Install rails for 11 Aichi E-16 Azuyun floatplanes. This would improve fleet reconnaissance capability. The conversion was completed in April 1943. Mogami rejoined the fleet with 3 twin 8-inch turrets forward. No aft turrets. 11 aircraft. This made her a hybrid. Neither pure cruiser nor pure carrier. She could neither fight gun duels effectively nor operate as a fleet aviation platform. She was a compromise driven by desperation. Japan needed reconnaissance aircraft. Converting Mogami was cheaper than building a new light carrier. The decision was expedient. It was not sound. Suzuya and Kumano continued operating as heavy cruisers. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, they escorted carriers. Suzuya screened carrier Junyo. Kumano screened carrier Hyo. When Hyo was sunk by carrier aircraft from USS Below Wood, Kumano rescued survivors. Both cruisers survived the battle without major damage. Then came Leyte Gulf. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23 through 26, 1944, was the largest naval battle of World War II, multiple engagements across thousands of square miles. The Japanese plan was complex. Multiple forces converging on Leyte Gulf to destroy American invasion transports. Vice Admiral Nishimura commanded the Southern Force. 2 old battleships, Fuso and Yamashiro. Heavy cruiser Mogami in her hybrid configuration. 4 destroyers. They would transit Surigao Strait at night, engage American forces, create opening for other Japanese units. The plan was optimistic. The execution was catastrophic. At 0100 hours on the 25th of October, Nishimura's force entered Surigao Strait. Ahead waited Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf with 6 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 28 destroyers, and 39 PT boats. The American battleships were mostly Pearl Harbor survivors. West Virginia, Maryland, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania, Mississippi. They had been sunk or damaged on December 7, 1941. Raised, repaired, modernized. Now they waited at the northern end of Surigao Strait in battle line, crossing the T, the classic naval maneuver. Every gun bearing on an enemy that could only return fire from forward turrets. At 0200 hours, PT boats attacked. Torpedoes missed. At 0300 hours, destroyers attacked. Fuso was hit by torpedoes. She broke in 2. Both halves continued moving for hours before sinking. At 0353 hours, Yamashiro was hit by multiple torpedoes. At 0352 hours, the American battleships opened fire. Range 14,000 yards. Radar-directed gunnery. West Virginia fired first. 93 rounds of 16-inch armor-piercing shells. Maryland fired. California fired. The other battleships joined. Over 4,000 shells were fired. Yamashiro was hit repeatedly. She capsized at 0419 hours. Nishimura went down with his ship. Only 10 crew survived. 1,600 died. Mogami was hit multiple times by 8-inch shells from heavy cruiser Portland. American fire control was excellent. American training was excellent. American ammunition was reliable. The shells penetrated Mogami's superstructure, started fires, destroyed the bridge, killed most of the command staff. The ship turned south, attempting to escape. She collided with heavy cruiser Nachi from Vice Admiral Shima's force entering the strait behind her. The collision was minor but added damage. Mogami withdrew south trailing oil. She had lost her bridge, her communications, her fire control. She was burning and barely mobile. At 0900 hours on the 25th, American carrier aircraft found her. Strikes from Task Group 38.1. Dozens of dive bombers. Bombs struck aft. Detonated the aircraft fuel stored for her Zuyan float planes. Detonated remaining ammunition. The fires spread. Captain Toma ordered abandon ship. Mogami was taken under tow by destroyer Akabono. The plan was to beach her on Mindanao. Salvage what could be salvaged. Scuttle the rest. At 1300 hours, more American aircraft attacked. Akabono cast off the tow and withdrew. Mogami was finished. Captain Toma scuttled her at approximately 1300 hours. She sank off Panay Island in the Visayas. 192 crew died. 653 survived. She had lasted 3 years after Midway. Converted to a hybrid. Sent into a surface engagement, she was no longer equipped to fight. Destroyed piecemeal. Suzuya participated in the Battle off Samar, the northern portion of Leyte Gulf. She was part of Vice Admiral Kurita's center force engaging American escort carriers and destroyers off Samar Island. At approximately 0800 hours on the 25th, Suzuya was near-missed by bombs from carrier aircraft. The near misses caused flooding. At 0850 hours, more bombs struck. The starboard engine room flooded. Speed dropped. At 0900 hours, fires reached the Type 93 torpedo storage. 12 torpedoes on deck, 12 in the tubes. The oxygen-enriched propellant detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. The aft section was destroyed. The ship began sinking. Captain Teraoka ordered abandon ship. Destroyers Okanami and Fujinami rescued survivors. Suzuya sank at approximately 1300 hours. Position 12 degrees 14 minutes north. 126 degrees 19 minutes east. 209 crew died. 620 survived. Kumano survived the battle off Samar but was damaged. On the 26th of October, torpedo bombers from Task Group 38.1 attacked. One torpedo struck Kumano's bow. The bow was blown off. Kumano reversed course toward Manila trailing wreckage. Emergency repairs in Dasal Bay. Temporary bow fitted. She attempted to transit to Formosa for proper repairs. On the 6th of November, while in Manila Harbor, she was attacked by carrier aircraft. 2 bombs hit. Minor damage. She departed Manila on the 8th. On the 11th, submarine USS Guitaro torpedoed her. 1 torpedo hit starboard side. She continued. On the 13th, submarine USS Bream torpedoed her. 1 torpedo hit port side. She continued. On the 25th of November, she reached Takao Harbor, Formosa. Full repairs would take months. On the 6th of January 1945, carrier aircraft from Task Force 38 attacked Takao Harbor. Multiple bombs struck Kumano. She capsized and sank. 448 crew died. 4 Mogami-class cruisers, all sunk. Mikuma destroyed at Midway. Mogami destroyed at Surigao Strait. Suzuya destroyed off Samar. Kumano destroyed in port. The triple threat cruisers, designed to circumvent treaty restrictions, built too light, converted to heavy cruisers when restrictions lapsed, sent into combat against enemies with superior training, superior logistics, superior industrial capacity. They performed adequately when conditions favored them. They died when conditions did not. When we assess the Mogami class, the question becomes whether treaty circumvention produced effective warships. The answer is complex, as designed. The ships violated treaty displacement limits by approximately 15%. They were declared 8,500 tons. They actually displaced 11,200 tons. This was systematic fraud. But other nations engaged in similar deceptions. Italian cruisers, French cruisers. Everyone pushed treaty limits. The Japanese simply pushed harder. The design itself was flawed. Attempting to mount 15 6-inch guns on 10,000 tons was overambitious. The ships were structurally inadequate, top-heavy, prone to cracking under stress. The welded construction saved weight but created weaknesses. The aluminum superstructure burned easily. The single funnel arrangement created problems with smoke interference. The stability was marginal. The Fourth Fleet incident proved that multiple ships damaged in one typhoon because they were too light for their top weight. The reconstruction between 1936 and 1938 corrected some problems. The bulges improved stability. The internal bracing strengthened the hull, but the modifications increased displacement to 13,000 tons. This was 30% above declared tonnage, 43% above the 10,000-ton treaty limit. The ships were no longer remotely compliant with treaty restrictions, but by 1937, Japan had withdrawn from the treaty system. Compliance no longer mattered. What mattered was capability. And capability had been compromised by the initial decision to design within treaty limits that were never realistic. The conversion to 8-inch guns made strategic sense. Heavy cruisers could engage enemy heavy cruisers. Light cruisers mounting 6-inch guns could not reliably penetrate 8-inch armor. But the conversion consumed 18 months per ship. During wartime, that was 18 months each ship was unavailable. Across 4 ships, that was 72 months total, 6 years of cruiser availability lost to modifications that should have been completed during peacetime if Japan had simply built heavy cruisers from the start instead of pretending to build light cruisers. The combat record was mixed. Against inferior opposition like USS Houston and HMAS Perth, the Mogami class performed well. Against American fleet units with modern fire control and properly trained crews, they died. Mikuma was destroyed by dive bombers. Mogami was destroyed by combination of gunfire and air attack. Suzuya was destroyed by her own torpedoes detonating after bomb near misses. Kumano was destroyed by progressive damage from submarines and aircraft. None survived. None accomplished anything strategically decisive. They participated in the invasion of Southeast Asia. They escorted carriers. They were sunk. The human cost was substantial. Mikuma 700 dead. Mogami 192 dead at Surigao Strait. Suzuya 209 dead. Kumano 448 dead. Total casualties across the class were approximately 1,549 killed, plus hundreds wounded, plus hundreds more who died when ships they were escorting were sunk. The crews did not choose the ships they served on. They did not design the treaty circumvention strategy. They simply fought and died in warships that were compromised from inception. The institutional failure was choosing treaty compliance over operational effectiveness. The Mogami class was designed to maximize capabilities within artificial restrictions. When those restrictions proved unrealistic, the ships had to be extensively modified. When the restrictions were abandoned, the ships had to be converted. Every modification consumed time and resources. Every conversion reduced availability. The end result was ships that were never quite ready, never quite adequate, and always requiring more work. Compare this to American cruiser development. The United States built treaty cruisers too, the Pensacola class, the Northampton class, the Portland class, all designed to 10,000 tons with 8-inch guns. All were overweight. All exceeded treaty limits by 5 to 15%. But the Americans admitted the violations eventually. They stopped pretending compliance mattered. When they built the Baltimore class in 1943, displacement was 13,600 tons standard. No apology, no deception. Just acknowledgement that 10,000 tons was inadequate for a modern heavy cruiser. The Baltimore class was superior to anything Japan built. Heavier armor, more guns. Better fire control, more anti-aircraft armament. The reason was simple. American designers were not constrained by pretending to comply with expired treaty limits. They built what was needed, not what could be shoehorned into artificial restrictions. Japan's failure was institutional. The decision to design within treaty limits when those limits were no longer enforceable was strategic error. The decision to lie about displacement was diplomatic error that provided no military advantage. The decision to plan conversion from light to heavy cruiser consumed peacetime years that could have been spent building proper heavy cruisers from the start. Every decision optimized for short-term political considerations over long-term military effectiveness. The result was 4 ships that required constant modification, consumed disproportionate resources, and accomplished little before being destroyed. Today, no Mogami-class cruiser survives. All 4 were sunk during the war. Mikuma off Midway, Mogami off Panay, Suzuya off Samar, Kumano at Takao Harbor. The wrecks have been located. Mikuma was found by the RV Petrel in 2019. Her hull sits in approximately 17,000 feet of water, too deep for salvage. Too deep for diving. The wreck is a grave site. 700 men died there. The other 3 wrecks are in shallower water, but have not been systematically surveyed. Salvage has occurred. Steel has been recovered illegally. Scrap metal from World War II wrecks is valuable. The ships are disappearing slowly, cut apart by salvage operators, corroding in seawater. Within decades, little will remain but scattered wreckage. No memorial exists specifically for the Mogami class. The crews are remembered collectively with other Japanese naval casualties. The ships themselves are footnotes in naval history. famous mostly for being designed to circumvent treaty restrictions, famous for the collision at Midway, famous for being destroyed in detail across multiple battles, not famous for accomplishing anything strategically significant. This seems harsh, but it is accurate. The Mogami class represented everything wrong with treaty compliance gaming. The ships were compromised by design constraints that should never have been accepted, modified extensively because initial construction was inadequate, converted because the original armament was insufficient, then sent to war and destroyed. 1,500 men died serving on ships that were never adequate for the missions assigned. Those men deserved better. They deserved ships designed for war, not ships designed for treaty compliance. At 02:13 8 hours on the 5th of June, 1942, Kumano spotted USS Tambor. The emergency turn to avoid possible torpedoes caused Mogami to ram Mikuma. The collision crippled both cruisers. Neither would have been in that position if not for the Battle of Midway. The battle occurred because Japan attempted to capture Midway Island and destroy the American Pacific Fleet. The attempt failed because American codebreakers had read Japanese communications. The codebreakers succeeded because Japanese codes were vulnerable. The codes were vulnerable because Japanese cryptography was inadequate. The cryptography was inadequate because Japan had prioritized other military capabilities over signals intelligence and code security. This is a pattern. Choices made years before combat determined outcomes during combat. The decision to design the Mogami class to treaty limits in 1931 determined that the ships would be structurally inadequate in 1942. The decision to lie about displacement produced ships that required extensive modification. The modification consumed resources that could have been spent elsewhere. The ships that resulted were compromised. They performed adequately against inferior opposition. They died against competent opposition. 1,500 men paid with their lives for decisions made by naval bureaucrats and politicians a decade before the war began. This is the lesson of the Mogami class, that designing weapons to meet arbitrary restrictions produces weapons optimized for compliance rather than combat. That treaty circumvention, even successful treaty circumvention, creates ships that are never quite adequate because they were never designed for reality. That lying about specifications to maintain diplomatic fiction wastes resources and time without producing military advantage. That when those compromised ships meet enemies who designed for combat rather than compliance, the compromised ships die, and the men aboard them die. And history records them as failures, beautiful failures, elegant failures, failures that demonstrate superb engineering skill applied to solving the wrong problem. But failures nonetheless. The triple threat cruisers, light cruisers designed to become heavy cruisers, treaty-compliant ships designed to violate treaties, 10,000-ton cruisers that displaced 13,000 tons, 15-gun cruisers converted to 10-gun cruisers. The ships that tried to be everything and succeeded at being nothing particularly well. They fought, they burned, they sank. 1,500 men died, and the treaty system they were designed to circumvent had collapsed years before any of them saw combat. They were built to cheat agreements that no longer existed by the time they were completed. This was the ultimate futility. Ships designed for a world that ended before they were finished, then sent to fight in a world they were never designed for. The mathematics were absolute. They could not win. They did not survive. We remember them not for what they accomplished, but for what they represented. The price of institutional deception. The cost of optimizing for compliance over capability. The result when nations design weapons to cheat treaties rather than win wars.